What's this? Star Wars? I love Star Wars! Star Wars miniatures? Contains everything that two players need, and people say that collecting miniatures is expensive. Shows what they know. Oh wow! I can't wait to get this home and play it! Finally, I have everything I need. My collection is completed. Huh? Yoda's coming out? And Wookiees? Oh my god! Hi everyone, my name is Discourse, and let's talk about skirmish games and how they're, well, just better. So to clarify, when I'm talking about a skirmish game, we're thinking about tabletop war games that usually consist of around 5 to 20 models per player. So for example, a game like Infinity, Battletech, Lunar, or the Batman Miniatures game, and these have just exploded onto the marketplace in the last 5 years. In contrast, army level games tend to consist of hundreds of thousands of miniatures all scattered onto the table. In my dreams. So examples of those are Warhammer 40k, Age of Sigmar, Bolt Action, Star Wars Legion, the list goes on. And these two categories are often juxtaposed against one another whenever people talk about the genre of war games, or when games talk about their own scale. This is engaging content, right? Now, I originally structured this video as a straight up army level games versus skirmish level games. That's right, I went full Jesse Eisenberg Lex Luthor on this. Fight night! But the more I wrote, the more I realized that it's just not really a competition. I just love skirmish-scaled games more than army-level games, in general. There's a lot of reasons for this, aside from the fact that I spent most of my youth playing against the AI in skirmish games in Command & Conquer. But before we get into that, let's dive into the strengths of the army-level game before anyone thinks that I'm doing them dirty. And the first is very obvious, but to me, the army-level game is very much the miniatures game. And I guess it was. There's something intoxicating about standing over a line of hundreds of teeny little men and giving the order to go over the top. Now, I am not trying to excuse the proliferation of conflict in the early 20th century in Europe, but I'm just saying that my success rate in these games is probably about equal to the big pushes of the British Army in the First World War. Is that distasteful? But I've gotten way off here, so let's pivot. So, spectacle, right? This is what army level games are all about. Hundreds of miniatures lined up, ready to go to war. You can get some really extraordinary sights from these. And it was this scale and scope that truly excited me when I was younger, and inspired me to take my first step into the miniature wargaming world. Well, it was actually a video game, but I'm sure there's lots of people who were inspired by big scale army games, so I'm stealing that anecdote. Everyone remembers those big sweeping shots of Rohirrim crashing into the horde of Isengard forces in Lord of the Rings. And that can only really be truly replicated in an army level game. Because one thing about big army level games is that they are usually about the army, not the terrain and not individuals. You can usually get away with just a big open wide table, maybe a few card boxes thrown down, and then put your army down and away you go. This really suits my tastes, because terrain isn't really one of my strengths, and it's not one of the bits of the hobby that I particularly enjoy. I just find it hard to get excited about hills. And for army level games, you can usually get away with a lot less terrain than in skirmish level games, which are usually defined by smaller, denser boards. Except for Hearthstones though, those things look awesome. And this paves the way for particular types of stories that can be told in army level games that just can't be told in skirmish games. With huge scale comes a larger scope, and the types of stories therefore that you can tell are just way bigger. There's a reason that Warhammer 40k is at the galactic scale, and it's so that they can sell you galactic sized armies. They're little men, but they can tell big stories. Oh, that is good. That should be like a tagline or something. Trademark that. Haha, you're not the only one that can play this game, Games Workshop. So this leads on to my next point, which will not be a surprise to anyone if you've watched any other content by me. But one of the most compelling elements of an army level game is the fact that I get to mainline plastic like a fiend. If you like a system and a setting, an army level game gives you way more opportunity to indulge yourself. Skirmish games usually have plenty to buy if you really want to, but you typically have to enjoy the different themes that different factions bring. With an army level game, if you're just a fan of a single faction, that can tide you over for your entire stay in the hobby. Take the Tau, for example. If they're all you care about, get out of my life, Imperium, then you can pretty much spend a lot of money on Tau and get plenty of models. You can live on Tau bread. Much like the Tau themselves, you can get infatuated with ethereals and live life for the greater good. And if you're a Space Marine fan, forget about it! You can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on Space Marines and never have the displeasure of having to look at something that isn't a muscle-bound, armor-clad spaceman. You just don't have that same opportunity with a skirmish game. They tend to have smaller model ranges by their very definition, because you just don't need so many. So with an army level game, you can just inject those plastic molds straight into your veins and just keep it coming. Now this does have the effect that army level games do have the effect of being able to monetize their content more effectively. Army level games can present perverse incentives, no Slanesh, not that kind, to create content that exclusively exists to funnel money from players' pockets into the company's gullet. Yum yum. You might spend $50 for 10 miniatures for a skirmish level game, or $50 for 30 models in an army level game, but if you only need 10 models for a skirmish game, but 90 models for an army game, then you know which one's going to drain your bank account faster than Brendan Fraser's spousal support payments. Yikes. So more stuff means more opportunity to buy stuff, and I'm actually at the point where I need the product line to be small, or else I will genuinely lose my house. You know, if I had one. So therefore, you typically don't need to buy as many models for a skirmish-based game then, right? And if it's not your main system of choice, then there's a much easier buy-in compared to an army level game. Which means that for experienced players, you can sort of sample a lot of different skirmish games without too much expenditure. And for newer players, skirmish games are a great introduction to the wargaming miniature hobby as a whole. They just require a bit less commitment. And it also makes it easier for you to trick your friends into playing it with you. See, it comes with everything you need, just go half in with me. Army level games can be a really tough sales pitch to get your friends into, especially if they have some awareness of what it means to get into the wargaming hobby. And as much as I really love the fact that army level games ask more from you as a hobbyist, your hobby can really come to reflect a lifestyle choice here, and that's not bad, but with skirmish games, that doesn't have to be the case. You know, unless you collect 40 different skirmish games. Haha, and this isn't an upside or a downside, because I love that lifestyle choice. But for your friends who are maybe just into something like board games, maybe trying to get them into a game like Infinity is going to be easier than convincing them to play Warhammer 40k Apocalypse. And as we move further into the future, and closer to that dystopian hellscape that the 80s warned us about, and 3D printing becomes more affordable and accessible, skirmish games present an easier buy-in for players, and it'll be quicker and easier to get all the miniatures you need through 3D printing, as opposed to waiting 3 weeks for all of your army level games to be printed out. So as an aside, games like Songs of Blades and Heroes, Brutality, Reign in Hell, those games that are completely model agnostic, and are basically just selling you a rules system, will probably do really well in the future. And I suppose thinking about it, the accessibility of skirmish games is something that I really adore. I mean, not for me personally, I'll buy into any system. But for more casual players who maybe aren't into the hobby as much as me, skirmish games present a way to dip their toe into the hobby sphere. I mean, we've talked about needing less miniatures, but that's not the only thing. There's also other elements like table size. Not everyone has a huge dining table which they can play games on, or even a store that they can visit. Especially not in the last few years, but most skirmish games can be played on a kitchen table or a coffee table. And that's good enough. And I love that that means more players and more people experiencing something that I truly love. And it keeps them away from bad habits like badminton. Oh god, I hope I haven't alienated the yuppie viewers. I love playing different games and the variety that brings. I love getting to grips with a new system and setting. Maybe less reading the rules, but learning the rules, getting to know them. And yes, I have my old familiar comforts, the games that I'll come back to again and again. But I love getting the excuse to buy more miniatures. If you've watched any of my videos, you know this already. And skirmish level games are just easier for me to buy into than army level games. They require less of an immediate commitment than army level games. Why spend hundreds of dollars on one game when you can spend hundreds of dollars on 3? And just as an army level game is about the clash of the Rohirrim against the flanks of the Mordor army outside of Minas Tirith, a skirmish game is like all those laborious hours of walking that Sam and Frodo did over difficult terrain. I'm not winning over anyone with that comparison, am I? My point is that the types of stories you can tell with a skirmish game are much more personal and focused on character interactions and drama. It's why skirmish games really thrive in narrative campaigns. If you only have half a dozen guys on your team, it's way easier to name them and personalize them, level them up and get invested in their journey. It's why Mordheim and Necromunda are still so beloved to this day and have die-hard fans. And because it's so much smaller in scope, it really lets you zoom in on a particular fantasy. And I don't mean like the genre, I mean like the fantasy of, say, what it would be like to truly command a group of mechs, or what it would be like to get punched in the face by Batman. That's just a lot harder to pull off at the army level. And finally, when it comes to getting the miniatures assembled and painted, if an army level game turns you into a factory churning out dozens and dozens of models, a skirmish level game turns you into an artisan, able to spend hours on a single model, or a few minutes in a pot of contrast paint like I do. Look, ultimately, these two styles of games aren't in conflict. I've just conflated the terms and juxtaposed them against one another for the purpose of what I hope is a fun video. But it's sort of an arbitrary line that we've decided to demarcate. Ultimately, skirmish level and army level are just useful marketing terms. For example, Star Wars Legion is definitely an army level game, but it has an entire mode and rules for smaller size games with far fewer models. So when does an army game become a skirmish game? So thanks for joining me today. Thank you for watching the video. It really means the world to me. And if you enjoyed this video, why not give it a thumbs up or subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. Thanks everyone. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Yes, for those paying attention, I prefer skirmish games because it feeds my addiction. What of it?